Meet me on the softer side. Meet me on the softer side. Softer side of your heart.
Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. You can find out about this and all of our other author events at www.skylightbooks.com, where you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. You can also follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at facebook.com. If you'd like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. And don't forget, Skylight Books depends on listeners like you to help support us. So whether you're in our neighborhood or browsing online, buy a book or two to help ensure that we'll be around for a long, long time. Thanks and enjoy.
Okay, you guys, put your hands together for Will Chancellor.
All right. Thank you much. I don't know, this author underneath me here is the mayor of their governor of Iceland, which is where this book ends. So it's pretty incredible to and he's speaking here, I think, tomorrow or in a couple days. I'm sandwiched in between William Volman, who's like one of my favorite writers, and the mayor of Reykjavik, which is where this book ends. So it's fitting. You got a couple people here have seen this book from its inception. This started in 1996. My freshman year in college, there was a Civ course which was explaining like all of Western civilization. And the very first day in seminar, this professor put up a slide of a statue of Poseidon. And he was like, well, what do you guys think? And everybody was really nervous since it was the first day of college. And then this one guy, this hulking 6'8" water polo player, raised his hand and said, I don't think it's that accurate. And the professor was like, well, that's an interesting comment. It's a statue of a god. What do you mean it's not accurate? And he said, well, I always thought Poseidon would look like me. and at that point, this is in 1996, and at that point I was like, all right, there's something incredibly fucked up about the psychology of this, of this person. And so that it became this mystery to me, who is this brave man 7 stories tall? And it's the mystery that the father goes on in the book, is to find out who this son, this person that he's birthed, that has come, from him, but is completely mysterious to him. So that's the mystery at the heart of it. I'm going to start reading from chapter 2, when Owen, the 6'8" Olympic-bound water polo player, who on the first page of the book suffers a career-ending injury and tries to remake himself as an artist. So this is us finding that out, that he's gone. Professor Burr asked a grad student to deliver the lecture of the Catabasis and left campus early to take Owen to the beach. Owen had been sleeping off the trauma of his final procedure with the surgeon when Burr drove off for his morning seminar. By now, he would be awake and feeling restless. Burr hoped the trip to Zuma would show him that no one wanted to keep him packed away. He could even stop out if he wanted. If things went well, they could hash out a plan for 2004 and have him back at Stanford next year. Burr opened the door and called for Owen. Silence. Empty. A tumbleweed word. Rolling, thirsty, thorned, empty. And whenever empty, also alone. These words snagged Burr as he gripped the kitchen counter and read Owen's post-it farewell. He peeled off the note and thumbed through the rest of the yellow pad in search of the real note, the reluctant goodbye from his son that must be here somewhere. He called upstairs again. The gravity of the house had changed, as if he'd come home to find half of his possessions packed up and moved away. He scanned the living room, taking inventory of chairs and lamps as if he'd been robbed. Had to remind himself that each bare patch of wall had always been empty, never held a mirror, never held a painting. Some emptiness was always there. Burr stumbled over a stack of books on the floor of his study, spines bruised and hyperextended, dust covers unflapped and torn as the column crumbled, and Burr took a slipping step step over the rubble. With a thick thumb, he undented the corners, rejacketed the hardbacks, and replaced them on the shelves, leaving a 2-book gap where his Loeb Odyssey should have been, which was fine, but no one could have asked. After surrendering to the scooped-out mitt of his leather chair, Burr toggled through a 12-disc carousel. He gritted his teeth and pressed the small remote. Each CD sounded hollow. Bill Evans, Getz Gilberto, Miles, Mingus, Weather Report, Brubeck, all empty. He thumped his knee with a rolled-up magazine, then back to the Post-it note stuck to his left index finger. Dad, I'm going to Europe to find out which half of my life I'm about to waste. After I figure this out, we can talk about graduating. Owen. He peeled the note and pressed it into the molding of the door frame, above pencil marks of Owen's height, taller than his father at 11, 6'8" at age 15, but still standing on tiptoes, still trying to get that extra quarter inch. Raising Owen had taught Burr the beauty of being marginal. The vain side of any father wants to be Atticus Finch. But what could be worse for a boy than a father impossible to outgrow? Better to let your son know he's the center of your life, and you are one of many moons. But this wasn't that. This was Owen telling him he was irrelevant. And when he was honest with himself, it pissed him off. The Volvo ground into gear and skidded into the street. The Burrs lived exactly halfway between the airports, but always flew from LAX. He figured today would be no different, but there was no point to any of this if he couldn't beat the traffic and clear Ventura in the next half hour. He rolled through a red light. In front of his neighbors and with kids walking home from school, Burr ran a red light and then another. Not orangish red. Burr ran through lamps minutes hot. He glanced at the windshield and read his inspection sticker in reverse. It had lapsed in late '03. He almost wanted an officer to lead him away in handcuffs just for that one moment of concern when a door would be opened for him and he'd be pushed in the back with a watch your head. Traffic hit long before Ventura, shattering the glassy calm of Rincon and Solomar. He was caught in a static mass and had to suffer the sight of frontage road drivers whizzing away north and south, making him another nameless roof on Highway 101, a die-cast toy for the news helicopters to beam. He peeked over his shoulder to see if there was any way he could get right and roll down the embankment to the frontage road. A highway patrol car was parked half a mile ahead, blocking his escape. Cars continued to rush by on the one-lane road to his left and Harbor Boulevard to his right. He was stuck. The empty space at the middle of two lines, the trapped zero in the 101. By Ventura proper, people were thumbing silver buttons and sliding transmissions to neutral or even park. He fiddled with the gear shift and looked at the analog clock on his rubber dashboard, then at the yellow arrow of in and out, pointing away from the highway to a trafficless side street where families shared French fries on concrete tables. Traffic crumpled behind him. Burr found second gear, only to round a curve and discover thousands of red taillights. Several of his fellow motorists had given up. One leaned against the window and grinned into her cell phone. One propped a paperback on the steering wheel. One yelled at his windshield and thrust a finger at the dark tinted windows of a pickup truck rattling license plate frames with its base. Burr, pinned against cement sclerosis, could do nothing but redden the shadows of the overpass. The cloverleaf, a maze of misdirection, spun traffic to all four compass points, but not the fifth, the omphalos, the only defined point of a compass, the director of directions. He tried the radio. NPR, but it's actually KCRW since I'm here in LA. KCRW helped. But then they started asking for money, not understanding that even though he had tenure, he had no savings account. He squirmed. He depressed the clutch for a second. Then the brake lights washed back over him and he came to a full stop. A gash of metal, which he took to be a discarded fender, rocked with the wind, tickling the cement barrier and catching the setting sun. Fire, the process we mistake for a thing. Traffic, the thing we mistake for a process. He lurched in his lane, then aimed straight for the front tire of a bumper-hugging Infiniti. The driver clucked his pointer finger. At that moment, Burr's Volvo could have been a tanker. Burr was moving right, and then right and right again, over the rumble strip, straddling highway buttons and whistling the raked asphalt. Down the spiral ramp he drove, thrown from the great clog and breezing past telephone poles and cypress tree fences, green lights yellowing in his wake. Only when he was nearing Highway 1 on the 2-lane road through the canyons did he realize that this was the pass for Point Doom, for Zuma. And that was where he ended up losing his son for the first time at age 6. So Owen disappears, and he's always had a very strange way of viewing the world. He's had this way of viewing color that is completely idiosyncratic, and he thinks maybe artistic. And so after his sports career is over, he's like, okay, well, I'm definitely going to do something. I'm not just going to, go work for Goldman. So I'm going to make my mark artistically before things get too late. So I may as well see if this strange way of viewing the world just happens to be, an artistic way of viewing the world. It's a very naive notion, and it's the kind of notion that gets punished in a place like Berlin. For those of you reading at home, we're on page 103. On his way back from the station, Owen found Kurt. I should explain Kurt, by the way. This guy that he's fallen in with is an art monster. He's this huge superstar in the art world who's he's young, but is already showing in huge museums. And he is in a wheelchair, which is something that's been publicized a lot. And it's, I don't know, you'll see how that plays out. On his way back from the station, Owen found Kurt on the south side of Danzigstrasse, smoking either a hand-rolled cigarette or a joint. Owen crossed the street. Joint. Come with me, I need your help. Owen thought of protesting that he hadn't slept in days, that he had just ingested his first psychoactive substance and was still shattered. But there was no way he would find sympathy in Kurt by complaining about something as banal as total exhaustion. You look run down. You need something? I'll survive. Whatever. We have to swing by my old gallery real quick. Kurt, now in his white undershirt, admired his triceps as he dipped the push rims of his chair from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Owen followed him to the heart of Mitte. Suddenly, Kurt stopped. Push me in. We're going to that black glass building on the left. A brushed steel sign jutted out from the black marble and glass facade, laser etched, Todd Zeal Gallery. Kurt flicked his cigarette to the street. Actually, when we walk in, we should both be smoking. Kurt lit 2 more Parliaments and handed one up to Owen. Owen left it dangling from his lip, burning his nose and making his eye water. Kurt hit the brakes, and Owen lurched forward. Just open the door, I'll do the rest. Kurt spotted the security camera and bared his teeth. He crashed through the door, hammering down on the tires and wrenching control from Owen's grip, headed straight for a white pedestal in the center of the gallery, which held a brass head under acrylic glass. He slapped the heels of his palms at the rims of the wheels, going faster and faster until just before impact, he shifted left and hooked the hand rim at the left wheel. Kurt and chair turned violently to the left, losing traction and skidding into the plinth with enough force to rock it back and unseat the sculpture from its stand. Both sculpture and pedestal teetered back toward Kurt, at which point he swiped the plinth to the ground. The disembodied brass head fell nose first onto the cement floor. The warbled clang meant damage. Oh, dear God, what have you done? The gallerist, Todd Zeal, came running at Kurt as if he were going to hug him and grieve rather than accost him. Kurt changed his vector and wheeled into the middle of some fluorescent orange yarn that had been knitted into a large net. The web entangled Kurt far more than he had intended. He ripped at the junctions and the screws. Blue plastic anchors and all came unseated from the drywall. He held on to one knot, wringing it furiously back and forth like a madman at the clapper of the town bell. Kurt tore the yarn art piece from 3 of its 4 moorings. One strand of the now frumpy piece clung to the spokes of Kurt's wheelchair and followed him through the room. as he headed straight for a wall-sized canvas of interlooping red and blue paint that looked like a close-up of chromatin. "This is an interactive piece, right, Todd?" Todd walked briskly to Kurt's side, trying to reason with him. "Why did you come here? If you wanted to destroy something, you should have gone to the satellite gallery in Charlottenburg. If you don't stop at once, I'm going to seriously freak out." Kurt couldn't quite reach high enough to tip the canvas from its attachments. He hopped in his chair to push as high as possible, but couldn't dismount the work. He tugged down 3 times until the wooden stretcher bars finally cracked and the painting caved in on itself. Kurt surveyed the piece, now crumpled on the floor like a car that had just collided with a telephone pole, and looked genuinely pleased. "It's all insured, Kurt, but I'm still pressing charges." "Oh, you bet. And like it or not, I still have pull in Basel. I can get your booth moved to Siberia with 1 phone call. Get the fucking checkbook from the desk drawer and write my fucking check." Todd seemed to be processing the whole scene as if a skunk had traipsed into the gallery. He needed Kurt to leave, but didn't want to get sprayed. 2 tourists had been standing against the wall this entire time, stunned. "It's been 6 months since the fucking show, Todd. I need to be paid for my work. I need money before you spend it all on Asian boys and have your assets frozen." Now to the assistant, who had been smiling at the entire scene until that last comment. "Oh, you didn't know that Todd touches 12-year-olds? Fuck you," Todd pleaded to Owen. "Can you do something about him?" For the first time he could remember, Owen had become a spectator, a follower. Maybe it was the drugs, maybe the lack of sleep. He took control of the rubber grips on the back of Kurt's chair. Kurt flailed wildly in his seat and turned around to grab Owen by the balls. Owen doubled over, pushing down firmly on the handles. The chair rocked back, nearly falling into Owen's knees, but Kurt sprang forward and landed on the casters. Todd swiped at the chair but missed and stumbled into Owen. Kurt was now pushing against a white lacquered panel. He opened the hidden cabinet, unplugged a USB connecting the video feed, and removed an aluminum laptop. He wedged the laptop between his legs and then taunted Todd by wheeling straight at him, then swerving and skidding away. Todd shrieked, "That's enough! Pay your fucking bills and stop living like a Turk! I'm not giving you a cent. We'll call it even. You're probably going to have trouble putting the net back together." Owen left the gallery in a hurry. Kurt took time to make small talk with the tourists. "Don't see that every day. Isn't Berlin so exciting? Everyone is so creative, don't you think?" He autographed the older woman's purse with a Sharpie and rolled after Owen. Todd and his assistant watched from the front door as Kurt wheeled off. Halfway down the block, he shouted over his shoulder, "Todd, you've been great. Can you get the tourists to sign releases? Thanks. Love you. See you in Basel." All right, so there's one last excerpt I want to read for you guys. It is on page 41, for those of you with books. Caroline Dennison had been looking up from her reading every few minutes to watch him scribble and sweep back his hair. Burr, trying to get down on a legal pad the flood of insights, thinking himself a little dangerous, even though he was translating Greek. He upset his coffee as he turned the yellow page, and she stifled a laugh at the clatter. He put down his pen and stood. Caroline blew on her tea and pretended to be flattered when he called her Kallisfuros, she of the lovely ankles. The line worked well enough to earn him a seat at her table. She looked down before meeting his eyes like a diver taking a deep breath. The world stabilized on their parallel that afternoon. While everything else drifted into blur, the clarity between their eyes remained perfect. At some point she must have stood and left, because at some point she wasn't there. There was neither betwixt nor between with Caroline. She was there, she was not. And because his mind refused to process anything purely binary, he looked like a lost boy to the cafe staff who told him they were closed and it was time to go. He tried to remember her gait, but could only remember her gliding. He tried to remember how she left, but when exactly does day leave us at night? The next morning, Burr was at the cafe 30 minutes before they opened. After a bagel and 3 coffees, he decided that he would not be leading a study section that afternoon and kept his table free. By 3, she returned. They talked about the courage of the ancients to trust that the sun would continue to rise. He said he was not a man of faith and would need her phone number. When the summer sun brought an archipelago of freckles to her nose and cheek, he named them the Caroline Islands and committed each one to memory. Ulithi, Tonois, Orluk, Pohnpei. He thought he could make her fit into his view of the world, but within a week of living together, she had become the map rather than something mappable. He dotted every coordinate into the aqua field of Caroline. They folded up together, perfectly aligned and protected, burying their world from the light of others. And just as an open map's 24 folds can seem impossible to unpuzzle and pack away, and their convergences were inscrutable, leaving others to trust blindly that the relationship worked. They blazed through the reception halls of deans and department heads. Young and old faculty alike buzzed around them wherever they mingled, not because she was the only Oxbridge grad in the room, not because this young couple radiated love, not because her father was the university president, but because wherever they went, they carried with them a world. For 2 years, they ate little more than canapes. Most of the reception room guests began conversations with, "I have something to confess," which was never an indication of being in that person's confidence, but did make them feel like junior clergy. The phrase became a punchline between Burr and Caroline. By the next spring, the sum of all these confidences made Burr's academic advancement inevitable. She would have been climbing the rungs ahead of him, but had put continental philosophy on hold to learn how to paint. His work was inspired, but the search for relevant texts was proving to be fruitless. In all of recorded history, only 2 partial inscriptions supported his reading of Heraclitus and the Eleatics. Rather than switch to anthropology or wait on the archaeologist to dig up something to analyze, he grew increasingly creative with his source material, and until his work hit almost New Age levels of mysto. Fellow department members, nonplussed at the camaraderie between Burr and Mission University's elect, thought he was on drugs, and probably supplying him to senior faculty. A new continent began to emerge in 1982. It was unexpected but welcome, like a new Hawaiian island. As this landmass burped from the deep, they traded booze and fritters for macrobiotic staples. They danced through their junior apartment as her belly grew. He sang the only song about Odysseus he knew, Beyond the Sea, with a real longing for her, even though she was still there. She wove through the second verse like Penelope, thinking of the globetrotting that would accompany his unfinished but surely forthcoming book Liminality. Whenever he translated the song into Greek, Perein, allos true getoio, which repeatedly failed to impress her, she countered with Charles Trenet's original La Mer. Violins and harps and floating until the instruments fell. The map hissed orange and began to singe. It was easy for Burr to dismiss the dark edges as something fundamentally unrelated to a fire, something reversible that he could fan away, clap out, or smother, something they could fix together until the edges crackled in flame. On August 21st, 1982, their map was lost in fire. And there's not much to say about what happened next. Islands became ashes. Owen took a life before he took a breath. He very nearly took 2 lives. His father bobbed between drowning and drowned. Their map was a logos that held his world from flying apart. When it burned, every thought broke to atoms and jittered into the sky. What was left of Burr was driftwood, silvered still, empty. Each morning saw a lifeless husk wash up on the floor near his bed. He rolled against the jagged bed frame, rolled back until his head wedged against the nightstand and his body curled up fetal. Lifted up, dashed down, bobbing and unable to decide if it was yet time to sink. There's nothing more heroic than the glowing eyes of a vibrant soul inside a body that has given up. The marathon runner who crawls that final mile. Burr was the opposite, dead eyes in a capable body, or a body formerly capable and rapidly depleting. Water was too sweet to drink, lips to throat to lungs parched and cracked. Even when inhaling, his chest seemed to cave in. When he tasted anything, it was ash. He surfaced briefly to change a diaper, warm a bottle, drink a bottle. He hung a mobile over Owen's crib. He called it a marionette, but it was really a Christmas ornament on a string. Burr duct taped it to the ceiling, but every week it fell. Strings dropped and tangled into the bends of the marionette's knees. In dreams, Burr looked around and found knots and snags in his own joints, tripping up each step a taut and tangled fall. Waking, he couldn't even look his newborn son in the eyes for fear of being pulled out of his loss, her loss. So it takes some real bravery for that first question. I don't know if anybody's feeling their wild oats. Yeah.
When you're writing, like with your inspiration, does it come from personal experiences and other things and kind of morph into its own thing, or how do you work through like that?
It's weird. Like there's like pretty much 0% autobiography in this book, but I ended up doing everything. The best word that I've come up with for this is reenactment. So all the things that I wrote about, I ended up doing, and I think that's why it took like 12 years. But so I think it's, there was this one germ, and then I spent about 4 years trying to figure out like who the hell says something like that, like who says Poseidon should look like me, and so that part was just trying to get my head around that idea. But then the rest of it is just kind of like images, just little strings of things that are scenes that I never really question, and that as soon as those things are there, I run with it, and I think that's more my process than anything else. And then in the course of writing, so I moved to New York in 2004 with a 1,200-page draft of this book. This was initially going to be like a big, like in terms of text book. But then a lot of things that I was reading, I realized that it would be a better story tighter. So I tried for 4 years to sort of whittle that 1,200-page book into something smaller, and it just sucked. So then I had to hit Control A and delete and start the whole thing over. So I started on page 1, and I wrote the book from the first person instead of the third person. This book is in the third person. And so the second draft was in the first person, and it was really after like Patricia Highsmith's, Talented Mr. Ripley. Everything that I was trying to do, I was trying to get that sort of a narrative push to it. And it was interesting, but it wasn't what I wanted to talk about. So then I hit Control A and delete and started over again for the third draft of this. From page 1, rewrote it. All the good parts from all the good images stuck, and then now it's here. Thanks. Yeah.
Whose first person was it from?
So the first scene of the second draft of this book was this guy who was this 5'6" hipster in Reykjavik, and he's sitting on a park bench, and behind him, he's pretty sure that that's Harold Bloom. He's like, dude, that's fucking Harold Bloom right behind me. And so this Harold Bloom's a literary critic who's, I guess, world-renowned. And this Owen comes up to Harold Bloom and recites a 30-page epic poem about like anti-capitalism. And he's it was a retelling of the Iliad with like G8 battles, and so that was how the second draft started. And the first person for the second draft, his whole thing was he's like, nobody's ever given me a second glance in my life. Like, the whole time that I've been walking through the world, no one's ever given me a second look. And here's this guy who nobody doesn't do a double take on, and he's fucking reciting an epic poem to Harold Bloom. What the hell? And so he goes tracking, but it was still the same question. It was still that same question that I had in '96 of like, who's this brave man 7 stories tall? And he was doing a lot of the same things that the father does, I think, in the third draft, but from a different point. Like it was pretty much just a rip-off of Talented Mr. Ripley. Yeah.
What are some memorable places where you spent time writing this book?
Whew. Lots of bars, lots and lots of bars. It's funny. So I moved into the Chelsea Hotel, and I had that little like convent kind of room up there, and so I wrote a lot of this at the Chelsea. But then that was when I didn't have the balls to delete everything, and I think that was actually really big, getting to a point where you can just say like, start over. That Orange Juice song, "Rip It Up and Start Again," is like, if I had like one mantra for my writing, it would probably be that. And so note cards, like ruled note cards, are fantastic for that. You just go to a bar, have a note card, write down a scene, and then you're good. So a lot of New York bars where we get friendly rates on drinks. Not as much coffee shops. I don't know. And then, kind of on the run. Like, I've been to all these places. I spent 2 months traversing Iceland. I went to Art Basel. I think, I have some very distinct memories of writing things like at the places that I had already written about, like in earlier drafts, which was kind of cool. It's like this weird deja vu, dreamlike state that I want the whole book to have. So, I don't know. Yeah. Doctor?
Why did you spell STOR?
Ooh, good question. So yeah, and by the way, like half the people who've written about this book have misspelled the title. But like Stories This Way, it came from Thomas Merton's 7-Story Mountain, which was a big book for me when I was in high school. That is about this guy. I mean, it's a guy who, Thomas Merton, describing like his life of sex and drugs and then entering a convent. And he, that spelling was really important for me, and I think that's sort of where this title came from, I think. Other thing was I wanted people to know it wasn't a collection of short stories. And then other thing is I really want to move to the UK eventually, so I figured better chance of moving over there. Maybe I'm kidding about that. I'm not really sure. But yeah, I don't know. It really came from that book, 7-Story Mountain, more than anything else.
How did you choose, or why did you choose to, in the book when you use dialogue, why did you choose not to use quotations but instead use the other style, which I don't know what that's called?
Yeah, I mean, to me it's just called the Ulysses style. And like in Joyce's Ulysses, that's how he does dialogue tags. I think it's a little more elegant. And it's a little bit less. I mean, there's a whole lot of visual. There are a lot of visual elements to this book, like the section right before. So, Professor Burr has this idea called liminality, which is about like the intersection of things, defining them. That nothing is purely, true or false. It's always an intersection between the two. Like the present is neither past nor future. It's defined by the intersection of the two. And it doesn't really exist only as this other intersection. So this is like, he comes up with this sign to talk about his idea. So like, this is a visual element in the book. There's a riff on this in chapter 4. And there are a lot of like very visual elements to the text. And I thought the dialogue tags worked well with that. I think it's more of a visual.
It's much more pleasant to look at than all the little quotes everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. It's like just hanging. It's what's that? Yeah, I think and there's, in the first draft of this, I really played. There were a ton of countries that had chapters that didn't end up in, like Owen went to Spain, Owen went to Munich, Owen went to the Orkney Islands north of Scotland, Owen went to Russia. There were all of these different chapters, and I used the convention for the dialogue tags from that country when he was there. So like the double, there's like a greater than, less than dialogue tag, I think, for Spanish fiction. And so I used whatever conventions were there for that first draft, but by the third draft, I was just like, nah, fuck it, this is like the way to roll. And I think I think I'll always use that. Yeah.
So it is, but that's my question, which is sort of answered, was like, because when I knew you while you were writing this, it was a book about Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
And then you walked across Iceland, and now the book is, and the little bit that you showed me later was in Berlin, and I was like, well, fuck out of Iceland.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean,
so would you, this sort of your own journey is also Owen's journey as you took this journey along to write the book, and so it all becomes
100%, yeah.
kind of a badly articulated meta.
No, I mean, you're right, and that's also why I identify with the father, because like the father's the one who's got to leave his cloistered life and go find his son. I mean, he's got to get up and travel around the world, and in order to figure out the answer to this question. So I think that's absolutely right about identifying through the process of going through, and discovering the things that I'm writing about. Iceland was always, so the one, back to that original germ, like who thinks like that? Who says a god looks like me? Only answer I found was in the Icelandic sagas, like in Norse mythology, specifically the sagas of the warrior poets. So the first draft of this was kind of a one-to-one mapping of different warrior poet sagas there's still, and there are vestiges of this now. Hal the troublesome poet is one of the 7 warrior sagas, and Hal is a character in Berlin. And so there's always, I can't really get away from the fact that Iceland is there. And Owen, the reason he was named that was to parallel Odin, who gave his eye. That's Owen's injury, by the way. I'm not spoiling anything since it's right up front. But Odin gave his eye for the gift of poetry, for art. And he left his eye on Mimir's well, and that's why he wears an eye patch. And that ends up being a significant reference in the book. But because of this, I was always sure it was going to end in Iceland. I traversed Iceland, over 2 months. I went from the westernmost tip to the easternmost tip, just on a solo walkabout, I guess. And I thought I was going to do like this amazing writing, but it ended up being this kind of more athletic thing of just like finding water. so I would hike like 25 miles a day just to find the next water source, because that was really, you could hike with 3 days of water, but you would only be able to hike like 7 or 8 miles just because you're carrying a lot of weight, or you could just keep it really light and just kind of fly, but the whole time not have any water, so you're totally...
So assume because you're in Iceland, you're building the time.
Well, that was the weird thing. I assumed that there would be no water. Like, I thought it would all be frozen, but there actually was water everywhere, and a lot of it wasn't, to do the adage. Like, a lot of it, there wasn't a drop to drink. Because you can't really drink. You can drink.
Just spring out of the library.
Yeah, exactly. And like commercials and Skittles rain from the sky. It's just like, yes. But yeah, like water was really the limiting reagent of that trip. But I don't know. I always knew that it was going to end in Iceland, so that place was fixed in all. I mean, I guess that was the starting point of the second draft, right? And so I had to go there eventually to know what the hell I was talking about. And I'm talking about weird places in Iceland. But the thing that's the real kicker is after 2 months of, having all of these near-death experiences, hiking completely by myself in places that, like, this was all off-trail hiking, just walking across the country. And I'm pretty sure there were some places that I was where people haven't been in, like, a year, like going down... It's like free down climbing a 60-foot rock face and coming very, very close to dying. The upshot of this was that it turns out to be like 3 paragraphs of the book. So it's like, I mean, it's, but the funny thing is, that's the level of the whole thing, you know? Like I had a piece in the New Museum, a 14-foot sculpture that I spent a year building in 2011, and it was to talk about, you know, and again, there are like 2 paragraphs about contemporary conceptual sculpture in the book. So it's like a lot of this stuff is like, this is basically, this came first, but then I did everything in it. So it's very difficult to separate the. It's reverse autobiographical. It's like, if that makes any sense, that the book came and then I ended up doing the things that I was writing about because I didn't, you know. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's my, you know, as opposed to like the canonical MFA advice, write about what you know. My advice, to the extent that I'm in a position to offer any, is write about things you have no clue about, but then like go do it, you know.
Maybe you should write about winning the lottery.
I think I should write about like curing cancer or something like actually like, you know, that's like has some social good instead of like, you know, the kind of things that I'm interested in. But yeah, I definitely lottery winning would work.
Is there anything that you like did after writing about it? And like, shit, I got that so wrong. What did you do?
You know, what's weird is the images were all pretty consistent. Like it was, the pictures were all pretty right on the money. The one huge thing is that like this book began as a takedown piece. Like I hated contemporary conceptual art and it just pissed me off. I was like, this stuff needs to stop because it's hurting my soul. And so when I started writing about art, it was to make it stop. And then in the course of doing that project, like, and actually like, it was through a gallery that was, you know, a pretty big New York gallery. I completely changed my opinion of a lot of contemporary art and went from a position of thinking that these guys were clowns to learning how to see it and realizing that there's a lot of beauty and there's a lot of care in the selection of materials and presentation of things that might look like, you know, they intentionally look like they're slapdash, I don't know, but they're actually pretty beautiful when you think about it. And Joseph Beuys is the one artist who is like #1 on that, as far as somebody that I thought was, you know, was a clown. But, you know, it was, now I realize is one of the most important artists of the 20th century. So that's the only thing that like totally changed, was doing that made me change my opinion of art. Yeah. And I think that, you know, there's a weird level of satire in this. Like I'm kind of taking the piss out of contemporary art, but in a very loving way, like from a place of love, whereas like the first draft was just out of bile. And I think it's, that doesn't work, by the way. That makes for really tiresome reading. But, you know, when you love something, it's more like, your parents, like you laugh when your family members take the piss out of you because you're like, all right, well, there's, you know, that's, there's a whole lot more truth to it, or there's a deeper truth to it. And to the extent that I'm satirizing art or theory, or art theory, it's from a place of love, whereas it started from a place of just like jealousy and hate. So. James Fuentes Gallery. And then it was the New Museum. They have a thing in the spring called the Festival of Ideas for a New City that was, and it was really cool. Like so the art, there are, like land art is the kind of art that I was the most drawn to. And Richard Long is kind of the top of that entire field. And the New Museum had like maybe 5 pieces for that festival thing in 2011, and one of them was Richard Long's. So it was like us, like this artist Daniel Subkoff, who I collaborated with, it was us right alongside Richard Long. So it was awesome. But yeah, totally changed the book, and I think made it a whole lot better.
How about, what do you feel about the direction of art now? Where do you feel art
I don't know if, I think directionality is a really problematic word, because I think of it more as like a wheel or like a pie chart. And I think there are a lot of different directions that different things are going. But I don't think that there's anything like a through line that's going, as far as one direction of it. And I don't really feel comfortable making like a normative statement about like this is where it should go. I think that there's a really odd dialogue with fascism and art from like going back to, well, maybe all the way back, but like Apollinaire and those guys like wanting World War I because they're like, oh, great art is going to come from this. And I think like anytime you put that normative claim of like art should do this, then you run the risk of kind of like
schools like Fish emerge in New York, Berlin, Prague. People just start doing things and collecting their ideas, together. Do you see any of that excites you?
Yeah, sure. I think what's happening, I think the thing that I follow the most is land art and what's happening with kind of re-looking at Michael Heiser specifically. There are some people that are reimagining some of that, and I think there's the one art piece that I'll really there's a bunch of fictional art in this, like conceptual pieces that could be actually put out, and I think I'm going to do one of the pieces in this book with an artist in Berlin. But the part of that interests me the most is really just messing around with the dialogue of the gallery space, which is really, it's like Duchamp or Yves Klein, probably more like Yves Klein than anything else. But the artists who are doing that are the ones those are the ones that I really like. All right. Thank you so much, guys. I can't tell you, it's just such an honor to be at this amazing bookstore that's been, I don't know, I said a lighthouse, just just this awesome, there's all this dialogue in the book about the barbarians are at the gates, and if there are gates, they're the front door of Skylight Books, and and this is just this awesome space in LA that, that keeps reading alive. So I don't know, thanks.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all of our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Fragile Gang. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, and the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.